Well, welcome back this week. I want to show something to you that, is a pet peeve of mine before we get into the main meat of this week's analysis behind the news. Our ambassador in Russia, Michael McFaul, was called to the Foreign Ministry headquarters in Moscow last week. And the interesting photograph that showed up in all the newspapers, and it's going to be difficult for you to see this, but you see this circle with a star in the middle of it. In the middle of the circle, inside the star, is the hammer and sickle. Now, the whole building, frontis of this building, is emblazed with these hammers and sickles and stars. It's just another indication that they still are communists in Russia. If they weren't communists and they didn't like communism, they'd take all these things down. They've had nearly, over 10 years to do it, nearly 20 years to do it. So there you are. I mean, whether it's parades, whatever it is, on the aircraft, the official airline of Russia, they still have the hammer and sickle on it. They are not communists. They are communists. They're just doing it under a different banner these days. The main thing that's happened in the last week, as all of us know, is three major issues. Benghazi, the phone records of the Associated Press's journalists seized by the United States, and then the IRS. The IRS scandal is what I want to kind of dwell on today, because it's very close to our hearts, if you will. In the Wall Street Journal, it says wider problems found at the IRS. Then the USA Today says Obama sacks tax chief. But then the Washington Post, where I was this last week, says, oh no, he quit. It wasn't sacked, he quit. Then it comes out later on that he was going to quit anyway in a couple of 3 months, that it was scheduled for him to leave the IRS. Then in the New York Times yesterday, Sunday, it says conservative groups not the only targets. They're trying to build a case now that it's not the conservatives, it just was part of these groups that were targeted. It included all sorts of different people. One editorial I read said that, well, of course there were a lot of Romney supporters who were targeted, but so were a lot of Obama supporters and that sort of thing. To make it sound as if the IRS is just doing its job and some Republicans, those nasty Republicans, are raising a furor over some of their supporters being audited. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the case. The IRS has been used by at least 6 presidents to harass and try and defeat through the tax system their enemies. This was done to us, the John Birch Society, as well under President Kennedy. But you see, the difference between ourselves and a lot of other organizations, and why Robert Welch set us up this way, is that we are not for profit, we are not non-profit. We are not tax deductible. We are not a tax deductible entity. As such, we don't have to disclose our donors. We don't have to disclose our members and that sort of thing. All the rest of it is public record if you're a tax deductible organization and has gone to the big brother in Washington, D.C. and asked for favors for not paying taxes. Robert Welch was very smart in doing this. Our forefathers were very smart in writing the Constitution in such a manner that made the income tax unconstitutional. That's not to say that they haven't tried it over the years. The first time was during the War of 1812 and 1814. They passed an income tax bill. The radical Democrats passed a bill for a personal income tax. They never implemented it because the war was over and the need for the money disappeared. The next time was under Abraham Lincoln. We'll talk about the federal government because they're the ones that won the war, and so they're the ones that have their major effect on us. So we'll address the federal aspect of it. They passed an income tax. It was repealed for another income tax in 1862. It was again repealed later on because of the public pressure against it. And then continuing on with a couple of ups and downs, and the Supreme Court ruling that the income tax was unconstitutional, we arrived at the debacle in 1912, the great socialist election, where no matter who you picked out of the 4 candidates for president of the United States, you lose. And so as a result of the progressive, the socialist atmosphere that came into the White House and the Congress as a result of the election of 1912, we got the progressive income tax. The second major plank of the Communist Manifesto for controlling the citizens of a country and bringing them under the control of the state. Now, our forefathers, the people who put this country together, knew that if the federal government could directly tax the individual instead of an event, like a tariff or an excise tax or something like that, that would give control of the federal government over that individual, over that business, over that church, over every aspect and groups, which we are now running into in that regard. So they wrote the Constitution so it could not be done. Well, they passed an amendment in 1913 allowing the income tax, and then it came into effect, I believe it was 1914. And as I said, 6 presidents have used the income tax, the IRS, to come down on individuals and organizations that they disagreed with politically. Started primarily with Hoover, Roosevelt, certainly Kennedy, and Nixon, obviously. He got into a lot of trouble over this, and Johnson as well. But at any rate, the thing is that what we see in addition to the Internal Revenue Service is something far more disturbing. Not that that's bad enough on its own, but we have seen the state of Missouri and the Homeland Security and others put together lists of potential terrorists, which include conservative organizations, veterans organizations, pro-life organizations and individuals. So these are the things, when you melt the IRS and these other anti-terrorist publications by this administration together, it paints a very disturbing picture. So disturbing that we must do something to forestall this behavior. What we want to do is to have more and more people who believe that they have been harassed and audited because of their political bent to notify members of Congress. And in this case, I'll give you one member of Congress that you should notify if you believe this is the case, and that's Mick Mulvaney of Maryland. He is very interested in knowing about anyone who's been harassed or audited as a result of their political bent by the IRS. We'll leave it at that. We wish him luck. We don't always agree with Mick, but he's a good man. He's an honest man. And there are those that mean to do something about this, if at all possible. Until next week, we'll see you then.